Come on. Of course, I use the dovetail tenon most of the time. Some people use the straight jaws. It's a matter of taste. So I threw a quick dovetail onto the lid. I tend to start with the lid section first and then work toward the bottom of the box last, so I have fewer changes in the chuck. Set the jaws in the calipers that I have for the width of the tenon that we currently cut, not because that's the size that we want to leave it. It just means that we don't need to go any larger than that because we know we won't have any kind of fit at that point. Since this isn't a very deep lid, I'll go ahead and just start with the spindle roughing or spindle gouge that I have, little detail spindle gouge. It's a D-Way 3/8 inch to make a few cuts. They're a little bit high. A really handy tool that I picked up has been a Thompson tool that was ground by Jimmy Clues, and it's one of his flat bar stocks, but what he's done is he's put a radiused end on it, cut it as a scraper, but he's also come across the end and cut this as a slight bevel. This particular tool works really well for making straight-sided boxes that have a virtually 90-degree transition to the bottom of the box. It gets in there and you can make a pretty nice cut as you're working in toward the piece. You rub just a hair.
Do you have to know Jimmy to get him to grind it like that, or does he sell it?
With Jimmy, he sells everything. No, he's a great guy. I was in one of his classes, and some guys had ones that were similar to this. This is a very simple grind to do yourself, but you can see the angle on it is, let's see, roughly I'd say about 60 degrees, and the key there is getting a nice sharp edge. You sharpen this tool when you get ready to use it, just like you would any of the other ones. But it does a really pretty good job if you take your time with any of these and don't try to rush them. But you set it at center. This is a classic end grain box. If you try to shove in, it'll cut. But it's always going to be easier to cut end grain sideways if you go pulling out toward the outside. So if you bore a hole, which we'll do for the deeper one, and then work your way constantly to the outside, you're going to get a little bit cleaner cut than if you try to jam in and cut straight on those end grain fibers that are coming at you. So they'll slice across a lot nicer and have a little less work for your tool to do. See what we need to clean up. So I got a little bit there at the center. Now, the other thing we want to do is take the opportunity to make sure that the bottom of this lid is flat, as I was talking about, because we don't want to have that cupping going in or out. I found that using a good, long, straight skew will wind up being one of your easier scraper tools that you can pull out. I literally will back it off far enough on my tool rest to make sure I'm not riding the cutting part of the bevel here and have a flat part of the steel to rest on. And gently come up to it and touch. You see it cleans up a little more, got a little more depth to pull up here. What we're going to be aiming for is you can bring your tool up or you can have a straight edge up here, and we're trying to see where we have gaps. And you can see right now there's a little bit of lift on those outer corners, and we want to try to get rid of that part of the box that isn't going to set flat, because we're going to see that at the joint. Now, what I'll point out is once you're inside the flattest part of your box, you can taper that section in, but you want to have probably about the first 1/16 to an 1/8 inch from that point, dead flat from there to there. Once you're inside, then you can add that negative rake, but you've got to be relatively flat on this edge, and we're almost there. Looks like this one corner is still a bit shy. So we'll have to look at taking just a hair more off. If you're not completely comfortable with the skew, you can also use the other technique that a lot of the segmented people will use, and get you a flat piece of wood with some sandpaper on top of it. Watch your fingers, turn your speed down, and bring that flat piece of wood up here. And so we don't fill the whole place with dust. We won't get too carried away with that. But that helps you get a nice flat surface all the way across when you have that piece brought up. So for now, we can look at where we're at for the box. Move on to the base of our project. Always remember to tighten both sides of your chuck to try to get a little more even tension and to keep your piece centered as much as possible. Looks like we'll be fairly close if we don't go all the way in. Last thing we want to make it do is a bottomless box. Turn your lathe speed down. Give your drill bit a chance to cut. This piece doesn't like this chuck. All right, that was trying to push it along here so we can get through, but take your time. Try to avoid your chatter, but we'll get relatively clean cuts even out of some of the chattering going on inside this box, just because that tool is really sharp. But taking your time will help that quite a bit. What I'll do is double check where we're at on the tenon. Now we'll begin to look at how the lid is going to be able to be fitted to the box. We don't want to go too wide as we're hollowing. And in fact, you may choose, as I've done a number of times in the past, to go ahead and fit your lid before you even start hollowing, because if a project's going to go south, it's normally going to be on that lid fitting. You do have the opportunity to go ahead and make your tenon a little deeper and readjust should you find yourself in that situation. So we've got about the right amount for the interior of the box. I'll make a quick cleaning pass of that to get rid of the chatter, but I didn't want us to go too far. So again, we're cleaning up the face where the top and the bottom of the lid are going to meet, trying to see if we've gotten rid of all the marks. I want to look and see if this is going to be relatively flat. It looks like we're pretty close with that. So what I'll do is rotate the tool rest now and begin reducing the size of the tenon to where we can maybe get a lid fit. And again, remember those corners. Don't lose one at this point. So I'm looking to come down about 1/8. As many guys will teach, as you start trying to approach a fit for a box, you want to put a little taper here and sneak up on it. It's easy to take off wood. It's impossible to put it back on most of the time. So one of the things that Jimmy, among others, talks about on lid fitting is to come in here, and once we get the bevel to the point where the lid begins to slip over it, don't immediately start trying to flatten the rest of the tenon. Go near the back of the tenon and try to get it to the same dimension, leaving a little bitty hump in the middle, and then start working that hump down until you get a point of the lid fitting the way you want to. What we're going to aim for at this point is hopefully a tight fit, because what I want to do is jam the lid back on here and be able to turn the top. Then when we can remove that lid, we would be able to sand it slightly, get the fit just perfect, and then we'll reverse the box and turn off the bottom. What I typically look for is trying to get the interior of the box would be finished, the same thing with the lid at this point, so you'd want to do all that sanding ahead of time. One more time, as they say, right? This is where I want to double check to make sure we're getting the right grain alignment. That's roughly where we are. Okay, now what we run into anytime you're with one of these boxes, the key is getting the points to line up. What we will have is there may be some slight irregularity between one side of the box and the other. This is why this is also a very friendly new person project. This is the time you can get out your sandpaper. Any palm sander or flat sander will help you match up any minor adjustments you may have, because if you're not dead flat from one side to the other, even just trying to get that perfect finish down, or if I've got the grain mismatch, we want to obviously rotate those around from side to side. But you can see we're reasonably flat along the two pieces we have. I would, at this point, do that sanding, get that fit, and make sure I was where I wanted to be, and even take it to the point of a finish sanding. Up to a point, we're still going to need to cut off the bottom and the top of the lid. So as I begin to work on the top of the lid, anytime you can, always bring up your live center and turn between centers to make sure that box lid doesn't come off. We won't keep it up there for very long, but we will have it up there long enough to give us some support as we remove the majority of the wood. So this will just help keep the lid hopefully from shifting on the box, and obviously the last thing we want it to do is fly off. Again, as you get in here closer with your tools, you can either be working with your skew or your spindle gouge, whatever you're more comfortable with. There's not a whole lot of material to remove, but obviously we want to take our tenon down. I tend to run pommel cuts with a long point up, just to kind of sneak into those first few cuts as we try to take off some of that. And I want to put a slight dome on the top of the lid. It's not going to be very deep, but I just want a slight, instead of being dead flat, I find it a little more interesting to come in with that pommel cut. Don't do that, Jeff. Get a very big pommel cut. See what damage I may have done here. So that's where we can get creative, or we can cheat. Everybody likes to cheat, right? No, actually, I would just pommel cut the rest of the top of that one off. In fact, we may do that if we run up with spare time. But everybody brings a backup. We can cut that video. Yeah, right. they wouldn't believe me if you didn't have something to edit. All right, we will do this the proper way. I'll give myself a little more working room here. All right, so it can be done. You'll notice that I'm trying to work pushing toward the headstock. Last thing I want to do is apply too much pressure and pull off the lid. When I make this finishing cut here at the end of it, I'm actually going to be using the bevel quite a bit to hold the lid onto the box. Now is the point you'd want to work on sanding anything to get the final fit on your lid. This one works fairly well. We want to be sure we get a shoulder similar to the way we would on any chuck for the box to rest up against, because we're going to get about as much holding power from those shoulders being able to resist those lateral forces as we would with the jam fit itself. So again, we'll just bring up the tailstock. Just a little persuasion. What do they say, haste makes waste? Is that how that goes? And we're customizing our box. That's not knocking, that's the wood popping back and forth. Let's give it one more whack. bottom of our box can be treated the same way that we did on the joints, where basically come up and scrape and get those flat, or you can also do a different kind of pommel cut to get a little angle on it. We now have a very large box. One or more, we've got a box. Appreciate the patience. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm sure there's plenty, but otherwise, that's just one way to do it. There's an endless variety on these particular style of boxes. Hope you have fun with them. Thanks for asking me here.
Thank you, Jeff.